Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I would like to thank my brothers in RAI for Strategic Studies for arranging that gathering and this lecture. Also, I'd like to thank those who participated in the previous panel, which we really benefited from. And honestly, I'd like to highlight that I really admire their punctuality, that we participated in other seminars, and we really noticed that yours is so punctual, which is a good start. God bless you. Welcoming my guests here today, Dr. Hamad AlBolushi, Professor of Political Science in Kuwait University. Also, I'd like to welcome Dr. Shehata, Professor of Middle East Policies in Oklahoma University, the United States of America. Hello, sir. Hello. And Mr. Nawaf AlQudaimi, the researcher and writer in politics and Islamic movements in the King Saud University in Riyadh. Welcome, sir. And maybe this seminar will be accomplishing for the previous one. We will ask a general question here, which is how could we protect our countries and communities from the infection of Daesh? And we will start with you, doctor, with a general question before we start coming to the details. Of course, I believe, or I think that the main clue or the password is to respect the human rights principles that I understand now in our communities. There is an argument regarding identifying the principles. We have Western, Eastern, Islamic, non-Islamic, but at least we're supposed to agree upon avoiding discrimination among people. That after all, the discrimination against people in general, whether a minority of or a majority, it will lead people to explode, or it leads to public explosions. Now, if the explosion is peaceful, we will be able to negotiate with a peaceful movement. But the trouble comes when the explosion becomes armed. And when it's armed, we transmit into the collapsed country stage, as the colleagues have highlighted before. And after all, dealing with a collapsed country is a really great problem, especially when we if we take a look along the history, the collapsed countries encourage the foreign intervention, which is happening nowadays in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Libya, and it might happen in different areas in the Middle East. And this is the nature of human communities. So if you have a failing community or country, there will be foreign intervention. And after all, Daesh is a result of the issue. And if the countries in the region wants to avoid falling in the Syrian slope or the Iraqi situation as well, they should at least respect main principles in human rights. There are some countries that had minorities, and some of those minorities feel that there is a sort of discrimination against them. For example, we have Iran, includes racial and religious minorities. Saudi Arabia also has minorities, especially religious minorities. Now, in both those countries, there are people who feel discrimination. If we have in Kuwait a sort of outlet or flexibility, but other countries don't. At the long term, this might cause an explosion. Yes, your point is clear. Here, Mr. Samer, Dr. Hamad summarizes the issue in the lack of human rights respect and briefs my first question, which is how to protect our countries from the infection of Daesh, in only to respect the human rights. But he didn't add any other points in his analysis. Is his analysis looks reasonable? I will answer in English if possible, because this is going to be easier for me.
I think that the primary problem, of course, as was said by my colleague and in the previous panel, is certainly largely political and even broader than the question of human rights. And it includes the question of political inclusion, political participation, rule of law, the very important point which occurs unfortunately in many Arab countries, imprisonment and torture and the consequences of imprisonment and torture later on. There's a very good literature about this, and we know from our region the consequences of imprisonment and torture in Egypt in the 1960s and what that led to in terms of radicalization of some elements of the Muslim Brotherhood and violence in the 1970s, radicalization of Islamists in Algeria in the 1990s and what that led to, and so on, in addition to, of course, Syria and Iraq and so on. So I think that the primary issue is political, but as was also said in the previous panel, there are a number of other factors. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was one of the necessary conditions, and the incompetent administration of affairs afterwards by the Americans and so on largely was one of the factors that led to the possibility of ISIS. I like to say that, unfortunately, both the unintended consequences of action, the 2003 war, as well as the unintended consequences of inaction, particularly the international community and the Obama administration's inaction with regard to Syria, produced the context in which ISIL and so on has emerged. Of course, we haven't talked about economic issues. We haven't talked about the possibility of gainful employment for the youth that Dr. Ghabra very eloquently spoke about, and the possibility that through meaningful education and so on, they can find opportunities in life and so on. So there are a number of different factors, but I very much agree that rather than focusing primarily on questions of theology and religion and so on, that's important, that really the primary cause has to do with the absence of democratic politics in the Arab world, unfortunately.
That's very clear. Thank you very much, Ustad.
Mr. Nawaf, Dr. Hamad concentrated on the part of human rights, and Dr. Samer concentrated also on the absence of democracy. Also, he highlighted an important point, which is the role of the American policy in Syria, starting from the 2003 war till now. It was clearly an unsuccessful policy. Now, how about your opinion? How do you agree or disagree with them, and what would you like to add? In general, I agree with them, with both of them, and the problem is in our countries, we cannot split the interior stability and protecting the community from terrorism away from the regional situation. This is not only an internal issue. Yes, inside you have to fortify the community with some procedures, or by creating freedom atmosphere, by giving a space for a peaceful protest, because every restraint to peaceful protest, even in the countries that had armed revolutions, all started peacefully. They had decades of repressive, and then came the Arabic Spring that produced the idea of peacefulness, the peaceful protest clearly after the rising terrorism. While for more than 10 years, Al-Qaeda was underestimating peacefulness. After the peaceful protest, they started even to change their speech, they changed their tone, they started to interact with such new phenomena. While for more than 10 years, Al-Qaeda's speeches were underestimating peacefulness, believing that those countries can never be created, and then noticing a number of Al-Qaeda leaders' speeches after the peaceful protest, they started even to change their tone. The peaceful atmosphere was dominating. Confronting the peacefulness atmosphere by repression will lead people to normally try to protect their families and their villages. As the same thing happened in Libya and Syria. In Libya, they sew up the whole thing faster because of the foreign interference. But in Syria, it took a longer time. And while starting peacefully for months without even one bullet shot, with slogans that wasn't with non-sectarian slogans, to the emerge of soldiers that came out just to protect non-ideologically their villages, their families. Then it turned to the entrance of Islamic troops, as the ruling system wanted those troops to be in. They let them out of the prisons, as the leaders in the jihadists were actually arrested in prisons at that time, as the presence of this Islamic state was on purpose, as they wanted to give an impression that Islamists are terrorists, and they wanted the whole world to be terrified from those Islamics and Salafis who was going to come out to them. The late you are, as much as you restrain the peaceful movements, you will have more violence. This is by nature. And as for the Gulf communities, that you cannot isolate the regional situation, even the racial case, because we're not separate from them. And we also have the racial situation, and it is clear for long years that they try to open discussions. And even if we look at the Gulf community, yes, we have a sectarian situation here. Even when, of course, this is gonna make it worse. Of course, this is gonna let us have a worse situation internally and abroad. Internally, it will be much more ferocious if we just close all the panels for peaceful work, such as demonstrating, protesting, and expressing their opinions. And this causes even more frustration and even more congestion. And this will make the people believe that peacefulness is of no effect. And this will make people believe that peacefulness is of no effect. This will make people believe that peacefulness is of no feasibility. Like, after all, they try to explain, they try to talk about themselves, they try to demand some reparations. Yes, your point is clear. Doctor, I would like to summarize this speech in three main points. Firstly, respecting human rights and enhancing it. Secondly, enhancing the democratic principles in our Gulf and Arabic societies. But all of these things would fail if the regional situation is still disturbed. Firstly, I would like your comment on the emerging, the regional and internal situation, and what are the practical steps that we have to take as Arab societies in order to enhance the principles of human rights, and in order not to be just giving slogans, and we would like it to be more practical and that everybody can just follow. Okay, firstly we would like to talk about the regional dimension. It is very important, and the regional situation is really connected and related deeply with the human rights. It's not about steps. We cannot tell, or we cannot say some specific steps that we follow and we solve it. Now, let me tell you one thing. If we have a minority or even a majority ruled by a minority, just like what happened in Syria before the revolution, in such systems, people really feel that discriminated. Now, if we're going to talk about the regional force, and especially the Iranian force and their desire to have the influence, how could we face that penetration, that regional penetration? But if you would like to have some practical steps, you have to give people an outlet. And this means not only to make them able to talk, because in Kuwait we are able to talk, but we cannot say that the Kuwaiti system is democratic. For one reason, because we're talking, but you cannot just see real changes on the ground, and especially the relation between the people and the authority. If this situation remains for years, it will produce an explosion. How can we solve this problem? We have to treat people humanly. We shouldn't arrest people just for expressing themselves. And we've noticed what happened in Kuwait regarding the nationalities, which delivers a message, at least, that we have a specific troops aimed with what's going on. Now, do we say that the authority is the only responsible side? No, it's not necessary. If we wanted to build the human rights principles in the society, we should build it on two things. First thing is to give people more space to express themselves, and on the other side we have to follow the rule of the law. But unfortunately, we're not following these rules. You know, moving from non-democratic into a democratic country, it's not an easy thing. It's not about following specific steps that easy. No, it's going to be hard this way, and here we can find the problems and the regional interferences, and then we can move after years, of course, into the democratic stage. The first step should be reinforcing the human rights concepts, or to start making the necessary political reforms, and then we can take care of the human rights. No, we cannot really make those reformations without giving people their human rights. You need to build the whole thing together. You need to give people the chance to be a part of your policy, of your political decisions. You cannot be the only one who takes the decisions. You have to get people relaxed when they are dealing with the authority. You have to respect human rights. It's connected to each other. We cannot work on one line without taking care of the other line. and even the Kuwaiti and Gulf cases or situations, we have the same position or the same situation here. And you can find sometimes in one of the countries, people are just arrested because they want to have some political reformation. You have to respect them. You cannot just say I'm doing the reformation, I'm doing the repairments, the required repairments while you're arresting people.
ممكن أضيف حاجة بالنسبة للي قاله الأستاذ بالنسبة للدور الإقليمي وأهمية الدور الإقليمي. هكلم بالإنجليزي عشان هنا أسهل. I think it also needs to be said that when we think about the region, right, it's not simply the movement of people or money and so on across borders. The Arab world in particular is a very densely connected regional system. And it is impossible to think that a situation or a phenomena in one country is not going to have a consequence across borders. It is connected in terms of ideas, the movement of ideas, because of a common language, a common history, a common religion, a common public sphere, a common media, right? People in Tunisia can watch what is going on in Kuwait, and people in Egypt can see what's going on in Tunisia, and so on. There's also, of course, the question of, the sensitive question of the transfer of money, which is an issue of particular relevance with regard to the question of ISIS and ISIL and so on. And of course, the question of identities that cross borders. If something happens in Bahrain, people in Saudi Arabia are going to, and in Iraq and in Iran and so on, are very sensitive to that and so on. So I think our region, this region, the Arab world in particular, is somehow more densely connected in one sense than Sub-Saharan Africa, than parts of Asia, than parts of Latin America, and so on. And this makes this issue of isolating the problems of ISIS in our country or this country much harder, I think, than if we were talking about France and Germany or, you know, Tanzania and Somalia or something like that.
So that's why we don't have a successful democratic system?
No,
because either we could go, all of us, all the Middle East to transfer to democracy, or one country couldn't succeed in itself.
This is a very good point, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But I was making the point about the difficulty of dealing with ISIS and limiting or quarantining the effects of ISIS on other countries. But your point is very correct, meaning that if we look for, we know that regimes in the Arab world cooperate with each other. And they cooperate with each other largely to maintain themselves. And that has meant not allowing individuals to travel because they have been saying critical things of one country and so on. All the other kinds of security cooperation. If we look at the Arab uprisings in 2011, we saw, you're right, the beginning of democratic openings in some countries, and other countries try to squash those democratic openings thousands of miles away because they didn't want, to be poetic, the winds of the Arab uprisings and democracy coming across the seas and so on and the borders and spreading to them. So in some senses, yes, democracy is a regional question because the outbreak of democracy in one country threatens the rulers not only in that country but in other parts of the region.
Then how could we start it? How could we implement it to our society? It seems impossible to have a full democratic package.
No, it's not impossible, and I think it will occur, hopefully without blood. And I think this is another issue that's very important. Many times the political systems and the people in power don't understand that actually opening up the system slowly and under their control is better for them and safer for them than trying to undertake repressive measures to quash reform. because that leads to explosion, as we heard earlier, and so on, in the earlier panel. I mean, I think there's no question that, as we said, political exclusion leads to radicalization. And if you don't deal with these problems intelligently and calmly and peacefully now, and there's only one way to deal with them, opening up the political system, then you're going to get disaster in the future.
أستاذ نواف تعقيبك على يعني الكلام.
Sir, I would like to hear your comment on what they have said, and at the same time I would like to know, as you've connected the regional development directly with the internal deteriorations, I would like to know what is the government rule regarding soothing the regional situation. And actually, we're observing the active and effective rule of the Gulf governments. Is their movements enough? Firstly, it was too late. After the aggravation of the problem and starting late solutions, it becomes so hard to find a good solution, and all suggested solutions become of no use. And it needs actually a long time to be effective. It could have been solved easily if they started in the very beginning. While the existing rule is all aimed to push the international community, and especially the USA, to give this public movement a space to do whatever they wanted to do, but it was so limited in the very beginning, and they left the whole thing and the whole issue to some internal balances. And looking at the Syrian scenario, we can find that Bashar al-Assad was actually supported from other countries, while the rebellions, they really didn't find real support from other countries. And of course, the longer this case exists, the more terroristic tone you can find in the area. And of course, as we said, late solutions are harder. And we can say that while the situation in Syria and the situation in Iraq remains as it is, that means that will never be any solution. And as I said before, we cannot isolate the internal issue from the regional area. So we can say that the situation in Syria and Iraq is controlling or affecting the whole region. And I don't agree that the situation in Iraq is promising or coming to a solution, as well as they are still ruling the same, as well as they are still using the same policies in Iraq, as well as the sectarian mentality is still there. It's still controlling and ruling the whole scenario, so we can never get it to an end. While there has been a very important experience that took place in Iraq 2007, when Al-Qaeda was there and was controlling a large areas of Iraq, which is the Sunnah areas. And then when the USA forced the government to have the troops in Iraq as allies, and they could form a real national ally, they could easily kick out Al-Qaeda from that area. So we can understand that Daesh or Al-Qaeda would never extend in an area without having a popular incubator that the society would accept. But after this experience, the situation hasn't been better in Iraq, because the system has came back, and it has the same sectarian running, or the same sectarian mentality. And so undoubtedly all the societies decided that if I'm going to choose, if I am having some choices, I'm going to choose Daesh as the better choice, better even than the existing authority. And that's why sometimes we get amazed from some persons who are originally non-Islamic, but they choose Daesh. Daesh for them becomes better than Al-Maliki system and Al-Maliki government. Those people believe that this is not a good choice, but he believes that this is less worse, because if we look now at the authority in Iraq, we find that the interior minister is from Badr troop, which is involved in terrorism far away, which is deeply involved in terrorism, according at least to the international reports. So it is so clear that still we have the split in the society, and sectarian mentality is still ruling the scenario, and it's not promising of any solution. And even if the Syrian government fell down, we don't think that the problem will be ending because of being late. On the internal aspect, we can bear in mind some of reasons that were very important in treating or dealing with the internal movements. Maybe the Gulf area is different a bit because of the oil. But if we look at the Arab world, they had some peaceful protests that were faced by suppression, and it developed to the scenario that we watch these days. And as, for example, in Egypt, the army interfered and they made the decision. But if we just take the Moroccan experience or the Moroccan case as an example, it was very smart experience in treating or dealing with the internal protests. Okay, let's understand that anywhere the opacity is ideal. Because you just sit on a chair and then you protest and you criticize the policies. You are not required to give any success. And that's why the opacity is always ideal. While you become a part of the authority, you find out, oh yes, it's very hard. And to rule a community, this is complicated.
النموذج المغربي يعني مثال رائع لحديثنا، ولكن أيضا في نموذج آخر وهو النموذج الإماراتي، وهذا سؤالي للدكتور.
Sir, the Moroccan goal is a great example, but there is another example to mention here is the Emirates example. If we're going to compare between Kuwait and Emirates, we will find that Kuwait is much more developed democratically and in the field of human rights, and also even in the media has more free space to express, while the Emirates are more developed economically than Kuwait. But the threatening of the Daesh danger and Al-Qaeda danger has more influence on Kuwait than Emirates, while you sit here telling us that democracy protects societies from those troops. So how could you explain this? Yes, I will give you another example. Saddam Hussein, when he ruled, no one dared to face him. It's not necessary when you have a strong ruling system. It's not necessarily to have to give you a solution for everything. It's yes, you mean the freedom, but you're connecting this to Daesh.
حقيقية صحيح فأبي يعني بعد إنك إن النقاش هو مقارنة بين الديمقراطية وبين الدول المتقدمة اقتصاديا.
إيه طبعا هذه جدلية مطروحة دائما. الآن مسألة الإمارات بأن هناك
Yeah, sure. This is very well known. Now, if we said the United Emirates, they have a ruling family which believes in the economical development. But of course, we cannot say that they are similar. to Kuwait, Sure, that's right. But if we're going to say that Emirates, they have the ruling family who believe in the importance of the economical part or the economical development. But we can never say that the nature of the society in Emirates is not similar at all to the nature of the society in Kuwait. Because Kuwait's society has a relative openness, and also in Emirates they are not really following up the clearliness of the institutional side. It's all related to one person or a group of people that have a specific policy related to the economical development or thinking about this, and that's it. It's not going to be continuous for longer years.
أنا كمواطن أنا ما لي قصة يعني في كل هذا الكلام الجميل والنظر. لكن الثورة الفرنسية أن يكون مشغول 24 ساعة عشان ما تأثر بأفكار متطرفة. طبعا الجانب الأول أنت بإمكانك الآن تتكلم
If you're going to talk about Kuwait, you can never tell that democracy in Kuwait is the main factor for the smoothness of ruling, because democracy has nothing to do with this. And of course, democracy is not responsible of the failure in the management system in Kuwait. And if you compare Kuwait as a country that has 4 million people with another bigger country that has 17 million people, they can manage their own business much more than us, while we have less population than them. But if we can ask a question, what would prevent the authority of making the necessary reformation in the managerial system? It's not what I meant. I'm talking about the danger of Daesh entrance. That's what I'm trying to understand. Why is the Emirates more protected than Kuwait from the danger of Daesh? Why the Kuwait is protected? So this is the conflict I would like to understand.
Okay, so if we look at Kuwait and compare it to the United Arab Emirates, one other thing I was going to say is that, of course, in countries that are not open politically and that do not have participation and that don't approach democracy and so on, one of their only claims to legitimacy is economic performance and delivery. And so what happens when, in those countries, the economies aren't doing very well? Right now in China, the Communist Party is very concerned because China's growth rate this year is only going to be 7%. Only 7%, because it's been 10% and above. And the fear is that that kind of lack of economic growth that people have gotten used to will cause political problems. But in countries that are based on participation and democracy, you don't have those kinds of fears.
And here there is an important point I would like to add to Dr. Shehata's, that at the end, any closed system, you cannot charge anyone of the ruling authority. And so on the long term, this system will be collapsing. On the other side, in the democratic systems, there is charging. Sir, you've given us the Moroccan model, and I'm giving you now the Emirates model. So how could you compare them? Regarding Daesh, we can say that threatening Kuwait is mainly based upon the geographical location of Kuwait. So this is all about the geographical fate that put Kuwait into this critical area. being closer to the areas of disturbance and the tribal overlap amongst the troops in these areas. This is what really caused the problem. The Kuwait being so close to the disturbance areas, this is the real problem. There is another problem regarding the Emirates, because you cannot separate the Emirates from the nature of the society there, because they don't have any protests. If the idea of the curse of oil, as well as sometimes the economical worries would be of much more concerns. Yes, there is an authority in Emirates, and after all, they have their decisions, their own decision, they can make it. That's why they have their own vision. We agree on the aim. We're all aiming that the citizen should be happy, should be free, expressing himself, but with different ways. The Emirates has its own way and the Kuwait is its own way. Why are we talking about the way? Part of the natural human demands is to be free to express himself. So I will give you an example. I was in Morocco in the book fair time of the year, and we were talking about the Arab Spring and discussing this matter. We were sitting all together from different countries. There were some publishers from Lebanon and some publishers from Egypt, for example. And when we mentioned Kuwait amongst the Arab Spring, we were talking about the case in Kuwait and how people went into the streets. At some time, thousands of them went protesting in the streets. They don't have an economical crisis just as the other countries. But did the Arab Spring have the same base as Kuwait? Those who started the protest in Al-Tahrir Square in Egypt, they were of that class. They were educated and they didn't go there to protest because they wanted economical enhancement. Even in Libya, even in Syria, they were demanding their freedom and democracy in their countries. So we have to split between those two cases. But it's very important to have your internal society to be protected. So if we're going to talk about extremism as a social case, it could be everywhere. So you can find British or French people that are joining Daesh, so it's everywhere. But our fears are from turning it into a phenomenon. You cannot control it, but you don't want it to be bigger. So it will become a phenomenon. But if you're going to talk about individuals, you will find it everywhere. You will find it Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, America, everywhere. And here relies the real danger. And that's why I think actually right now there are no danger around the Gulf area. Like in Saudi Arabia, if you can see most of the people who went to join Daesh, they have relatives in prisons. And actually they have been arrested without trial for almost 10 and 15 years, only while suspecting them. And you can never compare those communities with Emirates, because Emirates, they don't have any protests. And also the same thing in Qatar. They are alike, because the society is not demanding anything, because they actually accept their own situation with the economical income, with an acceptable economical income. But Kuwait is different, because Kuwait has been a constitutional country from the 60s, and we had the democratic popular movements. We have actually political awareness that produced some political demands, not economical demands. That's what made it different. Okay, we get back to the same point for the last question, and if you have any comments before discussion. For example, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia as a political leadership, they are really pushing towards the ally against the Daesh. And even the king, he was talking in one occasion about this matter. But at the same time, there are people, the people of Kuwait and the people of Saudi Arabia, they are they are supporting Daesh financially, and they are volunteering to join Daesh. And 70% of Daesh are Saudi Arabians. So why is the conflict? Why we're wrong about the people when we're telling the people are good, and the ruling systems or the ruling authority is I just come back to the first point. Mr. Nawaf, he said the very punctual sentence, yes, lots of Saudi Arabian people go to join Daesh, but if you look in the community, you will find lots of people who feel unfairness, people who feel discriminated, people who are arrested, people who cannot say their own opinions freely. And we should not say that Daesh is a terroristic organization. No, they are a rebel movement. And to understand a rebel movement, you have to understand their strategies. They cannot live without a popular incubator. And this popular incubator was available as a result of the discrimination. So these we're talking on the ground. Clearly, Daesh has got its popular incubator because it's giving them services, assisting them to get to their aims. And that's why Mr. Nawaf, as he said, that they were too late to find solutions. The international community was too late. Yes, he was right. Now, after all what's happening in Daesh case, and we are talking about allies in the region to face Daesh, with an exception of one of the countries, one of the forces in the region, this is not reasonable. We have to take all of the countries, because the popular incubator really attracts lots of people who felt discrimination. A part of the Iraqi people who joined Daesh, they were in the prisons in Iraq. And most of them has no relation with the religious background. Again, I can say, if you have people who are suffering from the lack of the human rights, you can always say that Daesh will find its popular incubator. It's not necessary to find Daesh coming inside Kuwait by themselves, but we're living with Daesh every day. Every day we get up and sleep looking through Twitter and on the TV on the ideas of Daesh.
Sure. I agree completely with what was said. I think what you're asking, or what you want, is what can states do internally to stop or take action against Daesh. And of course there are some things that states can do, right? So they can undertake successful de-radicalization programs, right? And there have been a number of states. Germany, for example, has undertaken and put together a de-radicalization program that helps families of potentially radicalized individuals engage, and to make them kind of less vulnerable to this. States can also put forward kind of narrative or discursive strategies that counter the narrative or discursive strategy or ideology of Daesh, right? And so on. And then they can also, of course, undertake, and this is a more longer term issue, undertake real educational reform. Real educational reform that does things that were spoken about earlier, such as emphasize the importance of independence and critical thinking and an emphasis on accepting other opinions and pluralism and so on, and making this a goal in educational curriculums. So these are some of the things that states can do, but really when it comes down to it, it's the political problems that are the core, and so on, that are the causes of this phenomenon.
Last thing I would like to add, I believe that when we ask why the youth join Daesh, the main issue is not ideas only, as well as we can see the youth are opening books, and then after that they go convinced with Daesh ideas. This is completely wrong. So we have to understand something very important. The greatest leaders in the Salafi Jihadi, they are all against Daesh. Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi and Abu Qatada and Abu Basir, all of them are against Daesh, but they join Daesh. And that's what explains that it's not all about ideas. They didn't join Daesh because he believes or he is convinced with the Daesh logic. There are other reasons. You can ask yourself a question: is the political situation makes people go to Daesh or join Daesh, forces people to join Daesh? Yes, you can say yes. If you compare the number of Egyptian people who joined Daesh before and after the coup, you will find after the coup there are a rising number of them went to join Daesh. And we heard about that person who went to Iraq and he made the suicide. And he was a candidate in the parliament. He was one of the leaders. What would make him join Daesh? Why? Why is that? Because he lost hope. And that makes you understand that this losing political hope makes youth join Daesh. And something else, the racial congestions makes people go to Daesh, and everyone actually thinks he's getting into a war for his own troop, and the war is coming. Even if we wanted this to happen or no, it will happen. Even in Iraq, even in Syria, somewhere it will be happening. And yes, if we ask the question, is sectarian tension makes people join Daesh? Yes, we can say that sectarian tension gets people to fight for their own or sector. So who can tell what is the relation between Iran and Daesh or Al-Qaeda? It was so clear. Iran wanted Al-Qaeda to be in the Iraq just for one main reason, because they wanted the Shiite troops in Iraq to be afraid, because they know that the Shiite in Iraq don't against Iran. They are against Iran, and they don't have any good relations with Iran. But Iran wanted to deliver a message to all the Shiites in Iraq that if you split away from us, you will have that enemy. Someone is threatening you just because you're Shiite, not because of your political attitudes. So you have to be united in order to stand in front of Al-Qaeda. That's why they forced Al-Qaeda, and they made Al-Qaeda, they made it easy for Al-Qaeda to stay in Iraq. If you can take a look at Yemen now, the Yemen is coming to the same stage where Al-Qaeda had in Iraq before. And who follows up the news for the past 2 days, you will find out that the Al-Qaeda started to get allies from the Yemen troops and the people of Yemen. Whatever is happening in Yemen is affecting us in Kuwait. And even if in Ecuador, not only in Yemen, one Sunni and one Sunnah and one Shiite have a argument, this will affect me in Kuwait. Even if you try harder and harder to get your control, a full control on your internal situation, you will never be able to. This is impossible. Thank you, your point is clear, and now we're going to start a discussion, and if anyone has a question, he can ask it. Anyone who would like to ask a question? Normally, when one asks a question, others come as a flow. I have one comment about Emirates. Emirates is the exception, as if you're sitting now and you want to ask a question. Why shouldn't we all become like Las Vegas, for example? No, not all America can become Nevada, for example. So let's give the Emirates a look to the positives, and especially to Dubai, but actually it is an exception. And you really need to import a cocktail of people in order to make a similar example. How could we make a model that is a positive model? How can we create a positive model with your own people? And this is the real challenge. There is other questions. Generally, I would like to thank our guests today and thank you all for your attendance and careful listening. And I would like to thank RAI Institute for Studies and wishing to continue similar panels. Thank you so much.